Hi, my name is Karthik Ravi, and this is just a quick video breakdown of our code as well as a running demo of our Stat 428 final project. So to just give a brief overview, as described in the final paper, our project is to try and model uh, the evolution of genes over time. So we're running a Monte Carlo simulation uh, that models the evolution of genes over time in order to find out which genes correspond or which values for genes correspond to a set of organisms living in the most optimal environment, in the most optimal manner, as well as living the longest and living the healthiest. So um, what that actually boils down to is we found a fitness function that corresponds to the health and the sustainability of every single organism. And then we also uh, noted down a set of characteristics that correspond to these set of organisms. And then we ran this Monte Carlo simulation in order to find out what values for these characteristics corresponded to the highest overall fitness. So within that Monte Carlo simulation, we ran what's known as a genetic algorithm. And just to describe that briefly, it's described more in depth in the final paper. But basically, we compute the overall fitness of the set of samples of organisms. And then from there, we compute a mating pool, which is basically a pool of organisms that is largely predicated, or where the number of organisms are largely predicated on the individual fitness of every single organism. And then what we do is we sample two organisms from that mating pool. We combine their DNA characteristics together, and then what we do is we take the new DNA strand and then we create a new organism from that. So this is the genetic algorithm file. We'll link the GitHub repository for you to look at as well, so you can look at it more in depth. And then this is the actual simulation file. It's very, very verbose, but the key points to note here are the accept reject algorithm over here, which is basically used to create a distribution from which we're sampling from to initialize the initial values for the characteristics of the organisms in the first generation. And then we have bootstrap, jackknife, and permutation tests, where we're using to find out what the mean estimate for the fitness is for every single generation, as well as the standard error of that estimate, as well as the confidence interval using bootstrap. Then we use jackknife to find the standard error as well as the bias. And then last, we compute a permutation test to find out whether or not these organisms from every single generation are actually coming from different samples. And that's primarily to show that there actually is an evolutionary process occurring, and these organisms are actually changing over time. So I'll just run the simulation just so you can see what it actually looks like visually. I'll just move this out of the way really quickly. Cool. So as you can see, like, these organisms are basically just moving around. The green dots are poison, and the red dots, the green dots are food, and the red dots are poison. And basically, these organisms are moving around trying to eat more food and trying to avoid poison. And the fitness of each organism is basically a square of the number of food particles that they actually eat. So as you can see, in the next generation, it took the characteristics of the most fit organism from the previous generation, and it combined those characteristics together to get a set of values that would correspond to higher degrees of fitness. And as you can see here, we're also printing out some key statistics. So as you'll see, that mean estimate immediately in the second generation was higher than the mean estimate from the first generation. So as you can see, that the fitness is actually increasing, and you can see from this from the permutation test that these organisms are actually coming from two completely different distributions.